Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back to Star Wars Return of the Jedi. This should be the last chapter, because I feel like I read this already. Yes, I did. We are in Chapter 9, the final chapter. I feel like I should have titled all of these episodes something special. Oh, well. Are you guys ready for The Force Awakens? I am. I can't wait. I'm gonna wait 3 to 4 weeks before I do a review on it, just so you guys get a chance to see it. And I'm starting a movement. I'm gonna call it Star Wars to Spite Miga. My buddy Miga hates Star Wars because it's popular, not even because he thinks the story's bad or plot or whatever, anything. Just because it's popular. And so I want as many people to go see the movie 10 times in theaters, before it goes out of theaters, or at the very least before it goes to the dollar theater. And help make Star Wars make so much money just to spite him. I personally will want to see this movie, I think, 15 times. And every time I see the movie, I will save the ticket stub. And what we'll do is, if anybody can see the movie more than me, I'll give them some sort of a prize, I think, would be cool. Anyway, on to the story, because it's 2 minutes in and I haven't started. The two space armadas, like their sea-bound counterparts of another time and galaxy, sat floating ship to ship, trading broadsides with each other at point-blank confrontation. Heroic, sometimes suicidal maneuvers marked the day. A rebel cruiser, its back alive with fires and explosions, limped into direct contact with an Imperial Star Destroyer before exploding completely, taking the Star Destroyer with it. Cargo ships loaded with charge were set on collision courses with fortress vessels, their crews abandoning ships to fates that were uncertain at best. Lando, Wedge, Blue Leader, and Green Wing, wow, they don't even get names, went in to take out one of the larger destroyers, the Empire's main communications ship. It had already been disabled by direct cannonade from the rebel cruiser it had subsequently destroyed, but its damages were repairable, so the rebels had to strike while it was still licking its wounds. Lando's squadron went in low, rock throwing low. This prevented the destroyer from using its bigger guns. This also made the fighters invisible until they were directly visualized. Increased power on the front deflector shields, Lando radioed to his group. We're going in. I'm right with you, answered Wedge. Close-up formations, team. They went into a high-speed power dive perpendicular to the long axis of the Imperial vessel. Vertical drops were hard to track. 50 feet from the surface, they pulled out at 90 degrees and raced along the gunmetal hull, taking laser fire from every port. Starting attack run on the main power tree. Eek, that sounds funny. Lando advised. I copy, answered Green Wing. Moving into position. Stay clear of the front batteries, warned Blue Leader. It's a heavy fire zone down here. I'm in range. She's hurt bad on the left of the tower, Wedge noted. Concentrate on that side. Right with you. Green Wing was hit. I'm losing power. Get clear. You're gonna blow. Green Wing took it down like riding a rocket into the destroyer's front batteries. Tremendous explosions rumbled the port bow. Thanks, Blue Leader said quietly to the conflagration. That opens it up for us. Cut over, Wedge said. The power reactors are just inside that cargo bay. Follow me, Lando called, pulling the Falcon into a sharp bank that caught the horrified reactor personnel by surprise. Wedge and Blue followed suit. They all did their worst. Or their best and their worst. Never mind, I don't know. Direct hit, Lando shouted. There she goes! Pull up! Pull up! They pulled up hard and fast as the destroyer was enveloped in a series of ever-increasing explosions until it looked finally like just one more small star. Blue Leader was caught by the shock wave and thrown horribly against the side of a smaller Imperial ship, which also exploded. Lando and Wedge escaped. That's sad. On the Rebel command ship, bridge, smoke and shouts filled the air. Akbar reached Calrissian on the comlink. The jamming has stopped. We have a reading on the shield. Is it still up? Lando responded with desperate anticipation in his voice. "I'm afraid so. It looks like General Solo's unit didn't make it." "Until they've destroyed our last ship, there's still hope," Lando replied. Han wouldn't fail. He couldn't. They still had to pick off that annoying Death Star. On the Death Star, Luke was nearly unconscious beneath the continuing assault of the Emperor's lightning. Tormented beyond reason, betaken of a weakness that drained his very essence, he hoped for nothing more than to submit to the nothingness toward which he was drifting. The Emperor smiled down at the enfeebled young Jedi as Vader struggled to his feet beside his master. "Young fool," Palpatine rasped at Luke. "Only now, at the end, do you understand? Your feeble skills are no match for the power of the dark side. Now you have paid the price for your lack of vision. Now, young Skywalker, you will pay the price in full. You will die." I lost it. He laughed maniacally, and although it would not have seemed possible to Luke, the outpouring of bolts from the Emperor's fingers actually increased in intensity. The sound screamed through the room. The murderous brightness of the flashes was overwhelming. Luke's body slowed, wilted, finally crumpled under the hideous barrage. He stopped moving altogether. At last he appeared totally lifeless. The Emperor hissed maliciously. In that instant, Vader sprang up and grabbed the Emperor from behind, pinning Palpatine's upper arms to his torso. Weaker than he'd ever been, Vader had lain still in these last few minutes, focusing every fiber of his being on this one concentrated act. The only action possible, his last if he failed. Ignoring pain, ignoring his shame and his weakness, ignoring the bone-crushing noise in his head, he focused solely and sightlessly on his will to defeat the evil embodied in the Emperor. Palpatine struggled in the grip of Vader's unfeeling embrace, his hands still shooting bolts of malign energy out in all directions. In his wild flailing, the lightning ripped across the room, tearing into Vader. The Dark Lord fell again, electric currents crackling down his helmet over his cape and into his heart. Vader stumbled with his load to the middle of the bridge over the black chasm leading into the power core. He held the wailing despot high over his head, and with a final spasm of strength hurled him into the abyss. Palpatine's body, still spewing bolts of lightning, spun out of control into the void, bouncing back and forth off the sides of the shaft as it fell. It disappeared at last, but then, a few seconds later, a distant explosion could be heard far down at the core. A rush of air billowed from the shaft into the throne room. The wind whipped at Lord Vader's cape as he staggered and collapsed toward the hole, trying to follow his master to the end. Luke crawled to his father's side, though, and pulled the Dark Lord away from the edge of the chasm to safety. Both of them lay on the floor, entwined in each other, too weak to move, too weak to speak. Or, to move to speak, sorry. Inside the bunker on Endor, Imperial controllers watched the main view screen of the Ewok battle just outside. Though the image was clogged with static, the fighting seemed to be winding down. About time, since they'd initially been told that the locals on this moon were harmless non-belligerents. Racists. The interference seemed to worsen, probably another antenna damaged in the fighting, when suddenly a Walker pilot appeared on the screen, waving excitedly. "It's over, Commander. The rebels have been routed and are fleeing with the bear creatures into the woods. We need reinforcements to continue the pursuit." The bunker personnel all cheered. The shield was safe. "Open the main door," ordered the commander. "Send 3 squads to help." The bunker door opened. The Imperial troops came rushing out, only to find themselves surrounded by rebels and Ewoks looking bloody and mean. The Imperial troops surrendered without a fight. Han, Chewie, and 5 others ran into the bunker with the explosive charges. They placed the time devices at 11 strategic points in and around the power generator, then ran out again as fast as they could. Leia, still in great pain from her wounds, lay in the sheltered comfort of some distant bushes. She was shouting orders to the Ewoks to gather their prisoners on the far side of the clearing away from the bunker, and Han and Chewie tore out, racing for cover. In that next moment, the bunker went. It was a spectacular display, explosion after explosion, sending a wall of fire hundreds of feet into the air, creating a shockwave that knocked every living creature off its feet and charred all the greenery that faced the clearing. The bunker was destroyed. A captain ran up to Admiral Akbar, his tremulous? That's not a word I've ever heard. Sir, the shield around the Death Star has lost its power. Akbar looked at the view screen. The electronically generated web was gone. The moon and the Death Star now floated in black, empty, unprotected space. They did it! Akbar whispered. He rushed over to the comlink and shouted into the multi-frequency war channel. All fighters commence attack on the Death Star's main reactor. The deflector shield is down. Repeat, the deflector shield is down. Lando's voice was the next one he heard. I see it. We're on our way. Red group, gold group, blue squad. All fighters, follow me. That's my man, Han. Now it's my turn. Yeah, that's something I never really thought about. Anyway. The Falcon plunged to the surface of the Death Star, followed by hordes of rebel fighters, followed by a still massing but disorganized array of Imperial TIE fighters, while 3 rebel star cruisers headed for the huge Imperial Superstar Destroyer, Vader's flagship, which seemed to be having difficulties with its guidance system. Lando and the first wave of X-Wings headed for the unfinished portion of the Death Star, skimming low over the curving surface of the completed side. Stay low until we get to the unfinished side, Wedge told his squad. Nobody needed to be told. Squadron of enemy fighters coming. Blue Wing, called Lando. Take your group and draw the TIE fighters away. I'll do what I can. I'm picking up interference. The Death Star's jamming us, I think. More fighters coming at 10 o'clock. I wonder how that would work in a 3-dimensional area. There's the superstructure, Lando called. Watch for the main reactor shaft. He turned hard into the unfinished side and began weaving dramatically among protruding girders, half-built towers, maze-like channels, temporary scaffolding, sporadic floodlights. The anti-aircraft defenses weren't nearly as well developed here yet. They'd been depending completely on the deflector shield for protection. Consequently, major sources of worry for the rebels were the physical jeopardies of the structure itself. The Imperial TIE fighters on their tails. And the Imperial TIE fighters on their tails. I see it, the power channel system, Wedge radioed. I'm going in. I see it too, agreed Lando. Here goes nothing. This isn't going to be easy. Over a tower and under a bridge, and suddenly they were flying at top speed inside a deep shaft that was barely wide enough for the 3 fighters, wing to wing. Moreover, it was pierced along its entire twisting length by a myriad feeding shafts and tunnels, alternate forks and dead-end caverns, and spiked, in addition, with an alarming number of obstacles within the shaft itself. Heavy machinery, structural elements, power cables, floating stairways, barrier half-walls, piled debris. A score of rebel fighters made the first turnoff into the power shaft, followed by twice that number of TIEs. 2 X-Wings lost it right away, careening into a derrick to avoid the first volley of laser fire. The chase was on. Where are we going, Gold Leader? Wedge called out gaily. A laser bolt hit the shaft above him, showering his window with sparks. Lock onto the strongest power source, Lando suggested. That should be the generator. Red Wing, stay alert. We could run out of space real fast. What is it, Iggy? They quickly strung out into single and double file as it started becoming apparent that the shaft was not only pocked with side vents and protruding obstacles, but also narrowing across its width at every turn. TIE fighters hit another rebel who exploded in flames, then another TIE fighter hit a piece of machinery with a similar result. I've got a reading on a major shaft obstruction ahead, Lando announced. Just pick it up. Will you make it? Going to be a tight squeeze. And it was a tight squeeze. It was a heat wall occluding 3/4 of the tunnel. Sorry. With a dip in the shaft at the same level to make up a little room. Lando had to spin the Falcon 360 degrees while rising, falling, and accelerating. Luckily, the X-Wings and Y-Wings weren't quite as bulky. Still, 2 more of them didn't make it on the downside. The smaller TIEs drew closer. Suddenly, coarse white static blanketed all the view screens. My scope's gone, yelled Wedge. Cut speed, Lando cautioned. Some kind of power discharge causing interference. Switch to visual scanning. That's useless at these velocities. We'll have to fly nearly blind. 2 blind X-Wings hit the wall as the shaft narrowed again. A third was blown apart by the gaining Imperial fighters. Green Leader, called Lando. Copy, Gold Leader. Split off and head back to the surface. Home 1 just called for a fighter, and you might draw some fire off us. Green Leader and his cohort peeled off out of the power shaft, back up to the cruiser battle. 1 TIE fighter followed, firing continuously. Akbar's voice came in over the comlink. The Death Star is turning away from the fleet. Looks like it's repositioning to destroy the Endor moon. How long before it's in position, Lando asked. .03. That's not enough time. We're running out of time. Which broke in the transmission. Well, we're running out of shaft, too. At that instant, the Falcon scraped through an even smaller opening, this time injuring her auxiliary thrusters. That was too close, muttered Calrissian. The co-pilot nods in agreement. Akbar stared wild-eyed at the observation window. He was looking down onto the deck of the Superstar Destroyer only miles away. Fires burst over the entire stern. The Imperial warship was listing badly to the starboard. We've knocked out their forward shields, Akbar said into the comlink. Fire at that bridge. I don't know why I didn't use the voice. Anyway. Green Leader's group swooped in low from bottom side up from the Death Star. Glad to help out, Home 1, called Green Leader. Firing proton torpedoes, Greenwing advised. The bridge was hit with kaleidoscopic results. Kaleidoscopic? What would you say? A rapid chain reaction got set off from power station to power station along the middle third of the huge destroyer, producing a dazzling rainbow of explosions that buckled the ship at right angles and started it spinning like a pinwheel toward the Death Star. The first bridge explosion took Green Leader with it. The subsequent uncontrolled joyride snagged 10 more fighters, 2 cruisers, and an ordnance vessel. By the time the whole exothermic conglomerate, finally crashed into the side of the Death Star, the impact was monumentous enough to actually jolt the battle station, setting off internal explosions and thunderings all through its network of reactors, munitions, and hulls. For the first time, the Death Star rocked. Yay. I guess I could've... I don't know. How does it go like that? Isn't this Italian for devil? I don't know. The collision with the exploding destroyer was only the beginning, leading to various systems breakdowns, which led to reactor meltdowns, which led to personnel panic, abandonment of posts, further malfunctions, and general chaos. Smoke was everywhere. Substantial rumblings came from all directions at once. People were running and shouting, electrical fires, steam explosions, cabin depressurizations, disruption of chain of command. In addition to this, the continued bombardments by the rebel cruisers, smelling fear in the enemy, merely heightened the sense of hysteria that was already pervasive. For the Emperor was dead. The central powerful evil that had been the cohesive force of the Empire was gone. And when the dark side with this diffused, this non-directed, this was simply where it led. And when the dark side was this diffused, okay, this non-directed, there we go. Confusion, desperation, damp fear. In the midst of this uproar, Luke had made it somehow to the main docking bay where he was trying to carry the hulking dead weight of his father's weakening body toward the Imperial shuttle. Halfway there, his strength finally gave out, though, and he collapsed under the strain. Slowly, he rose again, like an automaton. He hoisted his father over his shoulder and stumbled toward one of the last remaining shuttles. Luke rested his father on the ground, trying to collect strength one last time, as explosions grew louder all around them. Sparks hissed in the rafters, one of the walls buckled, and smoke poured through a gaping fissure. The floor shook. Vader motioned Luke closer to him. Luke, help me take this mask off. Luke shook his head. You'll die. The Dark Lord's voice was very weary. Nothing can stop that now. Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes. Luke was afraid to see his father as he really was, afraid to see what person he could have become, so dark. The same person who'd fathered Luke and Leia, afraid to know the Anakin Skywalker who lived inside Darth Vader. Vader too was afraid to let his son see him, to remove his armored mask that had been between them so long. We're on page 666. Although, depending on how you write it, it was actually 616. Where was I? The black armored mask that had been his only means of existing for over 20 years. It had been his voice and his breath and his invisibility, his shield against all human contact, but now he would remove it, for he would see his son before he died. Together they lifted the heavy helmet from Vader's head. Inside the masked portion, a complicated breathing apparatus had to be disentangled, a speaking modulator and view screen detached from the power unit in the back. But when the mask was finally off and set aside, Luke gazed on his father's face. It was the sad, benign face of an old man, bald, beardless, with a mighty scar running from the top of his head to the back of the scalp. He had unfocused, deep-set dark eyes, and his skin was a pasty white, for he had not seen the sun in 2 decades. The old man smiled weakly, tears glazed in his eyes now. For a moment, he looked not too unlike Ben. It was a face full of meanings that Luke would forever recall. Regret he saw most plainly, and shame. Memories could be seen flashing across it, memories of rich times, and horrors, and love, too. It was a face that hadn't touched the world in a lifetime. In Luke's lifetime. He saw the weazened nostrils twitch as they tested a first tentative smell. He saw the head tilt imperceptibly to listen for the first time without electronic auditory amplification. Luke felt a pang of remorse that the only sounds now to be heard were those of explosions, the only smells the pungent sting of electrical fires. Still, it was a touch, palpable, unfiltered. He saw the old eyes focus on him. Tears burned Luke's cheeks, fell on his father's lips. His father smiled at the taste. That sounds creepy. It was the face that had not seen itself in 20 years. Vader saw his son crying and knew it must have been at the horror of the face the boy beheld. It intensified momentarily Vader's own sense of anguish. To his crimes now he added guilt at the imagined repugnance of his appearance. But then this brought him to mind of the way he used to look, striking and grand, with a wry tilt to his brow that hinted of invincibility, and took in all of life with a wink. Yes, that was how he looked once. And this memory brought a wave of other memories with it, memories of brotherhood and home, his dear wife, the freedom of deep space, and Obi-Wan, his friend, and how that friendship had turned, he knew not how, but got injected nonetheless with some uncaring virulence that festered until hold. These memories he wanted none of, not now, memories of molten lava crawling up his back. No. This boy had pulled him from that pit, here, now, with this act. This boy was good. The boy was good, and the boy had come from him, so there must have been good in him, too. He smiled up again at his son, and for the first time loved him. For the first time in many long years, loved himself again as well. Suddenly he smelled something, flared his nostrils, sniffed once more. Wildflowers, that was what it was, just blooming. It must be spring. And there was thunder. He cocked his head, strained his ears. Yes, spring thunder for a spring rain, to make the flowers bloom. Yes, there, he felt a raindrop on his lips. He licked the delicate droplet, but wait, it wasn't sweet water, it was salty. It was a teardrop. He focused on Luke once again and saw his son was crying. Yes, that was it. He was tasting his boy's grief because he looked so horrible, because he was so horrible. But he wanted to make it all right for Luke. He wanted Luke to know that he wasn't really ugly like this, not deep inside, not altogether. With a little self-depreciatory smile, he shook his head at Luke, explaining away the unsightly beast his son saw. Luminous beings are we, Luke, not this crude matter. Luke shook his head, too, to tell his father it was all right, to dismiss the old man's shame, to tell him nothing mattered now, and everything, but he couldn't talk. Vader spoke again, even weaker, almost inaudible. Go, my son. Leave me? I did my best. At that, Luke found his voice. No, you're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you. You already have, Luke, he whispered. He wished briefly he'd met Yoda to thank the old Jedi for the training he'd given Luke, but perhaps he'd be with Yoda soon, now in the ethereal oneness of the Force, and with Obi-Wan. Father, I won't leave you, Luke protested. Explosions jarred the docking bay in earnest, crumbling, one entire wall splitting the ceiling. A jet of blue flame shot from a gas nozzle nearby. Just beneath it, the floor began to melt. Vader pulled Luke very close, spoke into his ear. Luke, you were right. You were right about me. Tell your sister you were right. I did my best, and I'm still so sad. With that, he closed his eyes, and Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, died. A tremendous explosion filled the back of the bay with fire, knocking Luke flat to the ground. Slowly he rose again like an automaton, and stumbling toward one of the last remaining shuttles. The Millennium Falcon continued its swerving race through the labyrinth of power channels, inching ever closer to the hub of the giant sphere, the main reactor. The rebel cruisers were unloading a continuous bombardment on the exposed, unfinished superstructure of the Death Star, now each hit causing a resonating shudder in the immense battle station, and a new series of catastrophic events within. Commander Jerjerrod sat brooding in the control room of the Death Star, watching all about him crumble. Half of his crew were dead, wounded, or run off. Where they hoped to find sanctuary was unclear, if not insane. The rest wandered ineffectually, or railed at the enemy ships, or fired all their guns at all sectors, or shouted orders, or focused desperately on a single task, as if that would save them. Or, like Jerjerrod, simply brooded. He couldn't fathom what he'd done wrong. He'd been patient, he'd been loyal, he'd been clever, he'd been hard. He was the commander of the greatest battalion, battle station ever built, or at least almost built. He hated this rebel alliance now with a child's hate, untempered. He loved it once. It had been the small boy he could bully, the enraged baby animal he could torture. But the boy had grown up now. It knew how to fight back effectively. It had broken its bonds. Jerjerrod hated it now. Yet there seemed to be little he could do at this point, except, of course, destroy Endor. He could do that. It was a small act, a token, really, to incinerate something green and living, gratuitously, meanly, toward no end but that of wanton destruction. A small act, but deliciously satisfying. An aide ran up to him. "The rebel fleet is closing, sir. Concentrate all fire in that sector," he answered, distractedly. A console on the far wall burst into flame. "The fighters are in the superstructure are eluding our defensive system, Commander. Shouldn't we flood sectors 304 and 138? That should slow them up." I would have said slow them down. He arched his eyebrows at the side. This made little sense to the aide, who had cause to wonder at the commander's grasp of the situation. "But, sir, what is the rotation factor to firing range on the Endor moon?" The aide checked the compu screen. .02 to moon target, sir. Commander, the fleet. Accelerate rotation until the moon is in range, and then fire on my mark. Yes, sir. The aide pulled back a bank of switches. Rotation accelerating, sir. .01 to moon target, sir. 60 seconds to firing range. Sir, goodbye, sir. The aide saluted, put the firing switch in Jerjerrod's hand as another explosion shook the control room and ran out the door. Jerjerrod smiled calmly at the view screen. Endor was starting to come out of the Death Star's eclipse. He fondled the detonation switch in his hand. .005 to moon target. Screams erupted in the next room. 30 seconds to firing. Lando was homing in on the reactor core shaft. Only Wedge was left, flying just ahead of him, and Goldwing just behind. Several TIE fighters still trailed. These central twistings were barely 2 planes wide and turned sharply every 5 or 10 seconds at the speeds Lando was reaching. Another Imperial jet exploded against the wall, another shot down Goldwing, and then there were 2. Lando's tail gunners kept the remaining TIE fighters jumping in the narrow space until the last main reactor shaft came into view. They'd never seen a reactor that awesome. "It's too big," Gold Leader yelled Wedge. "My proton torpedoes won't even dent that." "Go for the power regulator on the north tower," Lando directed. "I'll take the main reactor. We're carrying concussion missiles. They should penetrate." "Once I let them go, we won't have much time to get out of here, though." "I'm already on my way out," Wedge exclaimed. He fired his torpedoes with a Corellian war cry, hitting both sides of the north tower, and peeled off, accelerating. The Falcon waited 3 dangerous seconds later, then loosed its concussion missiles with a powerful roar. For another second, the flash was too bright to see what happened, and the whole reactor began to go. "Direct hit," Lando shouted. "Now comes the hard part." The shaft was already caving in on top of him, creating a tunnel effect. The Falcon maneuvered through the twisting outlet, through walls of flame, and through moving shafts, always just ahead of the containing chain explosions. Wedge tore out the superstructure at barely sublight speed. Yikes. Whipped around the near side of Endor and coasted into deep space, slowing slowly in a gentle arc to return to the safety of the moon. A moment later, in a destabilized Imperial shuttle, Luke escaped the main docking bay just as that section began to blow apart completely. His wobbling craft, too, headed for the green sanctuary in the near distance, and finally, as if being spit out of the very flames of the conflagration, the Millennium Falcon shot toward Endor only moments before the Death Star flared into a brilliant oblivion like a fulminant supernova. Han was binding Leia's arm wound in Ferndale when the Death Star blew, and it captured everyone's attention, wherever they happened to be, Ewoks, stormtrooper, prisoners, rebel troops. This final turbulent flash of self-destruction incandescent in the evening sky, the rebels cheered. Leia touched Han's cheek, he leaned over and kissed her, then sat back, seeing her eyes focused on the starry sky. "Hey," he jostled, "I bet Luke got off that thing before it blew." She nodded. "He did. I can feel it." Her brother's living presence touched her through the Force. She reached out to answer the touch, to reassure Luke that she was all right. Everything was all right. Han looked at her with deep love, special love. For she was a special woman, a princess not by title, but by heart. Her fortitude astounded him, yet she held herself so lightly. What the? Iggy, stop it. Once he'd wanted whatever he wanted for himself because he wanted it. Now he wanted everything for her. Her everythings. And one thing he could see she wanted dearly was Luke. "You really care for him, don't you?" She nodded, scanning the sky. He was alive. Luke was alive. And the other, the Dark One, was dead. "Well, listen," Han went on. "I understand. When he gets back, I won't stand in your way." She squinted at him, suddenly aware that they were crossing wires, having different conversations. "What are you talking about?" she said. Then she realized what he was talking about. "Oh, no, no." She laughed. "It's not like that at all. Luke is my brother." Han was successfully stunned, embarrassed, and elated. This made everything fine. Just fine. He took her in his arms, embraced her, lowered her back. My dogs are dumb, but I love them. Back down into the ferns, and being extra careful of her wounded arm, lay down beside her, under the waning glow of the burning star. Luke stood in the forest clearing before a great pile of logs and branches. Lying still and robed atop the mound was the lifeless body of Darth Vader. Luke set a torch to the kindling. As the flames enveloped the corpse, smoke rose from the vents in the mask, almost like a black spirit finally freed. Luke stared at with a fierce sorrow at the conflagration. They use this word too much, I feel. Silently, he said his last goodbye. He was alone, had believed in the small speck of humanity remaining in his father. That redemption rose now, with these flames, into the night. Luke followed the blazing embers as they sailed to the sky. They mixed there, in his vision, with the fireworks the rebel fighters were setting off in victory celebration. I like that they had those on the off chance that they won. Where was I? And these, in turn, mingled with the bonfires that speckled the woods and the Ewok village. Fires of elation, of comfort and triumph. He could hear the drums beating, the music weaving in the firelight, the cheers of brave reunion. Luke's cheer was mute as he gazed into the fires of his own victory and loss. A huge bonfire blazed in the center of the Ewok village square for the celebration that night. Rebels and Ewoks rejoiced in the warm firelight of the cool evening, singing, dancing, and laughing in the communal language of liberation. Even Tebow and R2 had reconciled and were doing a little jig together as others clapped in time to the music. 3PO, his regal days in this village over, was content to sit near the spinning little droid, who was his best friend in the universe. He thanked the Maker that Captain Solo had been able to fix R2, not to mention Mistress Leia. For a man without protocol, Solo did have his moments. and he thanked the Maker this bloody war was over. The prisoners had been sent on shuttles to what was left of the Imperial fleet. The Rebel Star cruisers were dealing with all that. Up there, somewhere, the Death Star had burned itself out. Han, Leia, and Chewbacca stood off a short way away from the revelers. They stayed close to each other, not talking, periodically glancing at the path that led into the village, half waiting, half trying not to wait, unable to do anything else. Until at last their patience was rewarded. Luke and Lando, exhausted but happy, stumbled down the path out of the darkness into the light. Their friends rushed to greet them. They all embraced, cheered, jumped about, fell over, and finally just huddled, still wordless, content with the comfort of each other's touch. What? In a while, the two droids sidled over as well to stand beside their dearest comrades. The fuzzy Ewoks continued in wild jubilation far into the night, while this small company of gallant adventurers watched on from the sidelines. For an evanescent moment, looking into the bonfire, Luke thought he saw faces dancing. Yoda, Ben... was it his father? He drew away from his companions, trying to see what the faces were saying. They were... ephemeral? I don't know. And spoke only to the shadows of the flames, and then disappeared altogether. It gave Luke a momentary sadness, but then Leia took his hand and drew him back close to her and to the others, back into their circle of warmth and camaraderie and love. The Empire was dead. Long live the Alliance. Okay, so that was a lot longer than I thought it would be. Ooh, there's another book. It's called Star Wars Aftermath. Looks like... I can't tell what the guy's name is. I think Chuck? Let me know if I should find that and read it for you guys. Well, we're done. That was it. Yay! I'm so excited. I can't wait to see the movie tonight. And I'm going with my family. Oh, man. I was talking with my mom so much about this movie. And when she's talking about it and she's just gushing and all this, it's like she's a little girl again watching the movie for the first time, and it's just a wonderful feeling because she's been so sick and in pain for so long. I'm just so happy to see her actually doing so well. Anyway, that's enough sappy moments and sad moments thinking about my mom being in pain. Let me know what book I should read next to replace this one. Should I go back to games? A friend of mine says that I should, but honestly, if you guys aren't interested in that, there's really no point in me going for games. I could make 2 channels and start uploading the games to that one and the books to this one. I don't know. Or maybe I'll just play a game whenever I feel like it. Or whenever the time feels right, I guess. I hope you guys go see the movie. Please go see it a lot to spite Miga, and visit my Twitter, and I will show him all of the pictures of your stubs. I mean, your ticket stubs. Shut up. Until next time. Goodbye, everybody. And may the Force be with you. I don't know why I whispered